I mean, I talk about it at a high level about how great trail running is for our veterans and how it helps them with their mental health and physical health and gives them positive reinforcement on living well. But ultimately, this is about saving lives.
Mhm.
And that's where our missions, collide and coincide. But the reason that I chose WTF, Warrior Trail Foundation, as our name, the WTF, was sort of an affront to the fact that
Today, joining us is Chris Raup. He is the founder of Warrior Trail Foundation. And I've been looking forward to having this conversation for a while, as he is one of the few other veterans that I know who's stoked on the sport of ultra running as I've been for so long, and has been played such a role in my life for such a long period of time. And well, I'll turn it over to you to, like, Chris, tell us first of all a little bit about, like, what was the impetus for you to create this foundation of all things, and what have you been up to with it lately?
well, yeah, just to give a little background, I left Iraq in 2006 and retired from the Army National Guard in 2008 and was dealing with some PTSD from Iraq. That's all there is to it. I mean, some of it was survivor's guilt, some of it was, shame. You don't even know where that shame feature comes from, but eventually I worked on it and I identified a large portion of it. But the work continues today. But I decided early on that the time that I felt best about myself in life is when I was giving back. So I started another foundation in 2009, which was called the Wounded Warrior Patrol.
Mhm.
And what we did is we took combat veterans that were wounded and put them into the uh, environment of winter sports and got them out skiing and snowboarding. And the ones that couldn't do that due to their disabilities, we went tubing or did snowmobiling or whatever else. But we, for the most part, brought veterans from Texas and Florida and the southern tier states, Arizona, Southern California, that almost never or had never seen snow, and put them out there. And what was cool is we brought their whole family. So it became this really great environment. And they came in for a week. We covered everything from point A to point B, and it was a great experience. And and see here, 2 years ago, we sort of lost our primary donor.
Mm.
We had a primary donor that was supporting a large the lion's share of those expenses, either through in kind or cash donations. So we lost about $250,000 a year funding. And we made a decision that we probably were going to go out on a high note. We did one final event, our 10th year anniversary. And it was actually our 10th event. There was 1 year in there we missed out on because of COVID. But so we did that final event and decided we were just going to go out on a high note. And we shut the foundation down and dissolved it. And I figured that was probably going to be it for me, but no, it was. I think it took me about 6 months to the point where I was like, now I got to start something different. And at that point, it's been about 4.5 years that I got it into ultra running, and ultra running has been like a really devout passion of mine ever since. And I was like, this is what I love to do. I know how much it helps me with my PTSD and ADHD and other, you know, just like getting through life, going out on a trail run each day is so valuable to me. I was like, I bet you there's actually studies on this. So I went out and did some research, found some studies and some material to support my theory that I always knew that recreational therapy was fantastic for veterans. Um, but I was really excited to find the studies that I found that supported trail running
Mm.
and went into the scientific reasoning behind why trail running works for veterans, specifically combat veterans with PTSD. And so we started a foundation. I put it together, and inside of it took me, I think, 6 weeks from concept till I had my nonprofit approval from the IRS, because I had already done it once and I knew how to do it. And yeah, quick turnaround, and we were up and operational. My previous foundation used their dissolution clause to provide the initial funds for this foundation. And I will say our previous foundation was 100% volunteer. We had zero paid staff. And this new foundation has some paid staff already. We have a social media expert that we have that we're paying for, and but I'm still operating on a free salary to act as the founder and executive director of this foundation. That's how we got started. Um, Sort of a lengthy background to what brought it to reality, but I think it's important to understand that I have and many people on our board have a much, quite a bit of experience in running a nonprofit foundation for veterans. So
Yeah, man, what I'm hearing in your story is that you were able to kind of find this intersection between something that you loved and something that the world needed, and then were able to sort of take action on that through the vehicle of a nonprofit. I'm kind of curious, this idea of spending lots of time out in the woods doing ultra running, it's one of those things where if you have to explain it, then you're never going to understand the answer. So what has it been like when you sort of meet somebody for the first time who needs some type of help that perhaps the Warrior Trail Foundation can provide, and the pitch is, "Hey, let's go spend 24 hours in the woods, and it's going to hurt. You'll get blisters. You'll get bit by things. It'll be great." How did that go?
yeah, well, it's sort of interesting. This foundation is just like our other one. We put it out there and put the presence out there and did a little bit of marketing, but not much on social media. And then I just sat back to see who would apply. And to date, we've gotten about 80 applications in about what 14, 15 months of operation. So it's quite interesting. Not all of them are experienced trail runners either. That's the really cool thing. Like I've had one of our applications is a gentleman from southwestern Colorado who just retired as a law enforcement officer for the National Park Service. And his trail running consists of running around his horse pasture. But he reached out to us and applied. We haven't actually aligned him with a coach yet. We're working on that. But you know, he tells me that his goal is to do a long, you know, do a long trail run on the John Muir Trail. Well, that's a little bit of a difference from, his horse pasture to the JMT. And
Slight
so,
elevation profile there, I would have.
yeah, slight different elevation profile, different obstacles other than horse manure to jump over. But, I think that's the kind of thing. But he's also a combat veteran who has found this as sort of like a means to help him navigate what he's missing in serving as a law enforcement officer and those other things. So, yeah, it's been sort of interesting how people are coming to us. Some people I find in conversation when I'm at a race, I run into somebody who's a veteran and says, "Hey, I've heard of you guys." It was really interesting last weekend when I was at Tahoe 200. I probably had 15 people come up to me the day before registration or at the start line who saw my logo. We have like team shirts that I'm wearing, and saw the logo and saw the hat and just made a comment that, "Hey, we're following along with what you're doing. It's fantastic," or "I've made a donation," or "I'm a veteran. I'm going to be reaching out to see if maybe I can get into a coaching program," whatever. So the word is traveling, but yeah, I haven't had that experience yet where I just found somebody off the cuff and said, "Hey, you should try trail running, and this is fantastic." But we are getting applications of people who are not really into trail running. And an interesting thing is many of some of those applications are from females who don't feel safe being out on the trails,
Mm.
who would love to get into trail running, and they see this our foundation as a conduit to explore that. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely an element where, like, whenever I'm teaching somebody, for example, in a coaching relationship, of the importance of sleep, for example, safety is one of the things that we often, like, neglect.
yeah, yeah,
Because, you can say a lot about the idea of how do we understand the sort of pathology or the working out of post-traumatic stress. And if like a female, for example, has been in an abusive relationship, she develops PTS symptoms, and then a year later they're still there, but she's still in that relationship. It's like, well, that's not a disorder. That's like, of course, if you're in that environment.
yeah,
um and man, what it kind of sounds like to me is like this, the principles of healing and reconnecting are kind of the same, like, because you could ask, well, why not an equestrian program? Why not a Boy Scout type program? Why not,
yeah,
but then it's like all those kind of have this commonality. But what's so cool about Warrior Trail is there's a very real sense in which the path of post traumatic growth is felt and lived and manifest. It's concretized, it's made into action. In It's sort of like, what do they say about 100-mile races? It's like life in a day.
yeah,
Right? So you can kind of practice like, oh, the dark abyss, and then the sun rises again, right?
yeah, exactly. No, that is absolutely true. And my preference is towards the longer races, 200 plus. And that's like life in 4 days.
Or 4 lives, maybe.
In 4 lives in 4 days, maybe. Yeah, it is. But it's interesting what you said there about the trauma. And we've had a surprising number of applicants come through with military sexual trauma in their background.
Mhm.
And I was a little bit shocked I mean, out of the first 20 applicants we had, five of them were MST
Wow.
survivors. And I was so put off by that I actually reached out to some of my peers some of my peers in the officer corps that I had served with for many years, some who were still serving, some who had progressed up to the rank of even 3-star general. And I asked them, basically I asked them that, our abbreviation WTF is not accidental, by the way. We can
Mm,
talk on that.
mm,
But I asked them, WTF, what is this all about? And I was really disappointed to hear the prevalence of MST in the military today and over the last 10, 15 years. And, as an artillery officer, for the most part, I spent my whole career in units with only men, right? And because I served in retiring in 2008, I was out before women were being integrated into the combat arms in that capacity. So it's just not something we had to deal with, you know? And so it is something that we're definitely addressing. And you brought up something there about equestrian programs. I actually have two veterans that are being coached in our program today that are also going through equestrian therapy.
mhm.
And I was with one of them over the weekend and asked her the question about that. And she was telling me about, how it works and things like that and her experience with it. It was sort of funny that they took her out into the pasture and told her to pick a horse, and she picked a horse that had extreme trauma itself.
Mm.
And she's like, maybe not the best mix. You know?
Yeah.
So, but it's we are I just wanted to use that point to highlight the fact that we don't try to hold ourselves out to be the end all be all solution. We think that there's a perfect mix between ongoing therapy and maybe talk therapy and equestrian therapy or fly fishing therapy or whatever it may work in your world, and just adding trail running into the mix. And we're not even specific that it has to be trail running. You could be a fast backer or a through hiker or whatever else. We're going to train you. We'll work with you because ultimately it's about improving the mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Yeah, one of the commonalities that I'm hearing with all of this is there's a reconnection to something in the natural world. What do you think it is about that process? We might get kind of transcendentalist here for a little bit that
Yeah.
provides that kind of healing. Like, why do we need a reconnection to the natural world in that way?
Well, I mean, I think if you can just disconnect from the noise that's going on in the world around you, and right now we are, it's sort of interesting. In talking to my social media expert the other day, I was like, I don't even know why I signed up for that race. She's like, I do, because my job is to get you to sign up. you know but there's just so much noise today, from social media, from the news, from everything we hear from the people around us. We're constantly bombarded, right? I can remember when you first got XM satellite radio, it was just music, there was nobody talking,
Mhm,
right? And now there's radio shows within the XM satellite. There's still messages being conveyed here. It's not just music, right? And even the music is conveying messages to us. But you get out into nature and you hear birds and you hear the wind rustling through the trees. I'm here in central Colorado, Summit County, Colorado. The aspens, the breeze, the birds, seeing animals, listening to water, cascade past you. I think it's all just quieting of the mind. And when you can quiet that mind, it helps out. And then there's the optic sense for people who, um, as you're moving, you don't have to be running, but as you're moving through the woods, there's a scientific backing to that, and it's called optic flow. And you're walking down a single track that's like 12 inches wide, and you're looking down to make sure you don't trip over that next rock or root or whatever it may be, or step off the trail. But at the same time, your brain is seeing, your eyes are seeing, and your brain is registering the trees that go by you, the, the thistle that's sticking out the side that you don't want to walk into. You don't make a conscious decision on every one of those trees to not walk into them. Your brain does that for you. And the more that it does that, the more it quiets the frontal cortex,
mm, mhm.
which is where all of that stress and everything is being processed, right? And I could go back and look at my notes on the specific parts of the brain that do that, but the reality situation is the same part of your brain that deals with that stress and that PTSD and that MST and all those other things that creates noise and affects your thought process is the same part of the brain that gets quiet when you get optic flow going.
Mm,
And in a perfect world, I'm dreaming of the day when we have a mobile MRI that sits on your head like a hat like this, and we can walk through and just watch the red turn to blue,
mm,
you know? And that's going to be really awesome. But they are doing it in labs using, simulated, are using active MRIs and using simulated, projection screens that are like three-dimensional.
mm.
So that's being proven. It's just, I look forward to the day when we can take it to the top of a 14er, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be cool. What that makes me think of is when you're in that kind of optic flow state as you're trail running and navigating these kind of various, undulations in the trail and having to constantly adapt yourself, you're putting yourself in a state where your subconscious, basically your body is able to take in an enormous amount of information. So it's something along the lines of like, let's say at any given moment you're receiving 10,000 bits of sensory information, but you're only aware of like maybe 20 of those. But
Yeah.
so we kind of have this Freudian idea of like there's a separation between conscious and unconscious, and there's this like wall. But then what's cool is what ends up happening. And I've had people ask me, what do you think about when you're running for that long? And you try to think of what do I think about, and you don't have a great answer. Like, yeah, sometimes specific topics will come up, but more often it's like it's not so much that I'm thinking about something consciously. It's like that center of awareness is now sitting at that veil between conscious and unconscious, where I can see myself quickly adapting to things in the environment that I'm not even like, I don't have to think consciously about. I just do it, but I'm watching myself do it in that process. It's this
Yeah.
deep flow of like I'm aware, of the things I'm not aware of, but then I'm also not. Yeah, it's sort of like a fuzzy. You can think of it like this. So like there's a function in the brain that focuses on the particular, right? So like let's
Mm.
say I'm looking straight at you, I'm focusing on your eyes, and then I might look away, and then I sort of blur my vision and zoom out, and then I zoom back in. But then in sort of this flow, you have like an optimal balance between these two things.
Yeah. So it's really, to me, the most interesting thing that I find is that on long runs, I don't get it so much on the shorter runs. And you hear this from marathon runners. They talk about like, when do you get the runner's high? Well, when you first start running, you might get that at like mile 2 or 3. And then as you develop a base, it might take you to mile 5 or 6 till you start to get like that runner's high. But for me, I do find, especially in my longer run days, um, where I'll find it's almost like an out of body experience. Like I almost see myself from a
Mhm.
drone point of view going down the trail for small sections, like, and then I'll almost congratulate myself, like, wow, that was an awesome section. You just crushed that section. Might have been 70 yards long, right? But it was really technical. And you just like nailed every rock just perfect. And you barely touched the soil because you were bouncing over the rocks and things. And then you settle back in and then trip over like the smallest little nubbin, and you realize like, how did that happen? I just ran through 70 yards of really highly technical terrain, no problem, right? And I almost took a header on something the size of a quarter, right? But so that happens. But then the other thing that happens with me is, once I get to that point where I've like quieted all that other noise, then I can pick a topic and I can do some deep work on that topic
Mhm.
on a 3 4 hour run.
Yeah.
And I can come out of that topic like, oh, with total clarity. And the one thing I'm trying to figure out right now is, how do I capture that? Because if I don't capture it in that moment, like, I almost have to stop on trail and capture it, because even if I just wait till I get back to my car, it's like the noise starts to come back in, and that message that seems so crystal clear to me, a half hour beforehand, is already being diluted,
Mm.
you know? And maybe I'm second guessing it. And then maybe I'm saying, oh, well, it's not really going to work in this situation or whatever else. But man, 45 minutes ago, I had it nailed, right? And it was like a clairvoyant moment for me where everything was perfect. And then as I get closer to the car and all the other noise and like common, I won't even say common sense, but like traditional thought process or whatever starts coming back in and changing it. I don't know a lot about it, but I'm a huge fan of watching movies about the American Indians, and or documentaries on them. And I imagine that their vision quests that they did was specifically along the same lines of what we're doing in their hunting expeditions, and the whole concept of the warrior mentality. The warrior in the American Indian sense was the person who put their own self at risk for the better of the tribe. And it wasn't, in 90% of the time, it wasn't about going out to fight somebody or to protect the tribe. It was going out to put food on the table for the tribe. It was
Mhm.
going out to, on a 5-day hunting expedition to bring back venison for the tribe so that they could eat, right? But that warrior was putting himself at risk to leave the comforts of his teepee in his village, to go out to put food on the table and to provide for the tribe. And that's why we call ourselves the Warrior Trail Foundation.
Hmm. Yeah. I love the parallel there, and what it makes me think of is how if you trace the roots of this idea of the American cowboy going out and pioneering and making this independent, glorious life, like that pattern came from the tribes. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily the American pioneer per se; it was what you just described, which is I think
Right.
sort of poetic in a way. And there's yeah, what it sounds to me like too is that if somebody goes to combat, they're sort of playing out that same pattern, But then
Mhm.
if something like a trauma occurs, then it's like a failed hunt. And then
Yeah.
you put that failed hunt in your soul until that can be healed. And then by going and doing a reenactment of that hunt, so to speak, but then completing it properly, you're
Mhm.
sort of connecting the wires where it's like, okay, I've got my completed journey and now I can move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I won't beat around the bush. I've DNF'd more than my share of 200-mile races, and I don't see any of them as failures. I see them all as opportunities to learn something and to explore a different experience. And it's so funny. I mean, with each one, I feel like I'm more and more prepared, but it's still less than a 50-50 shot when I toe the line, you know? And the hardest part that I'm dealing with now is the mental aspect of it. The physical aspect, I feel like I've got that down. It's the mental aspect of it. You know, and then and I won't even say I think it's arrogant to say that I have the physical aspect of it down. I have the physical aspect of it down if I'm presented with perfect weather and perfect environment.
Mhm.
Like the stars still have to align for me. Okay. But, Cocodona this year was no perfect environment. It rained on me for 40 out of 48 hours and I was walking through quicksand. Um, you know, couldn't even imagine trying to run through it. And, you know, my, uh, I just look at it and say, well, that's the cards that were dealt. And, it was still an awesome race and an awesome experience, and the 125 miles I spent out there will be some of the most memorable 48 hours I ever spent on the trails. So I'll be talking about that when I'm probably 80 years old, you know?
Yeah.
You
What
should have seen the year it rained nonstop in the Arizona desert.
Yeah, it's funny how when you're what we I feel like we need is like an adult sandbox to play in. Because
Yeah,
you can be fit and do all of the things that benefit your health and longevity with like a tenth of the exercise that you do. But there's when you put yourself in a high stakes sandbox, you can then it's no wonder that certain things start to come up as you described of like, oh, I can now practice completing the circuit after allowing myself to quote unquote fail, and then tell my nervous system, hey, failure doesn't mean death. In fact, maybe that's not even the right word to describe it.
right. No, I don't think failure is the right to just I don't even like the term um, DNF. I mean, did not finish. Well, I in whose definition, right? I mean, so I promise you, I was finished.
Yeah.
But um, at one point, I had made up some T-shirts for myself, and on the back of those T-shirts, I wrote DNF, and it was "Do not fear,"
Hmm.
you know. And to me, if you don't enter races because you're afraid you might DNF, or if you don't undertake a business venture, or if you don't enter into some sort of therapy or do something to improve your life or your relationships or whatever else out of fear, well, then you're not giving yourself the opportunity to truly live.
Mm.
And that to me is the thing, when we talk about ultra running and especially like 100 being a day in life, that's what it's about to me. It's about undertaking something that you do not know if you're going to be able to finish it. And, don't get me wrong. I love to go out and run a 50K. It's fun. It's a fun day, right? It's a refreshing change to doing a 4 or 5 day trail race with no sleep and, being hungry the whole time and wet and cold and miserable and all those other things. But at the end of the day, I don't enter 50Ks with a significant concern that I'm not going to be able to finish it.
Yeah.
So at the end of the race, it's fun, it's a good experience, but it's not exactly what I would call life changing.
Yeah.
You know?
It's,
And
it's still known territory. You can more or less predict what
yeah,
could happen.
exactly. A worst case scenario, I might run 20 miles of it and limp home for the last 11. Oh well, right? But but when you go toe the line for a 200-mile adventure, and you're 30 miles in, 170 miles is a little bit more daunting, you know?
Yeah.
And and then you start having to do this equation. And I guess you don't have to do the equation, but you find yourself doing this equation as to where I step in this next step. Do I step down an 18-inch step and put that load onto my quad, or do I step off to the side onto this other rock and make that 9 inches and 9 inches to reduce the load on my quad? Because that might mean the difference 170 miles from now,
Yeah.
you know? And it's crazy how your brain starts going through all this like rationing of
Mhm.
everything, And instead of living like with this complete mindset of abundance, you feel like you're living with this mindset of only this much that I can give right now and still be able to give in 3 days.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I'm trying to train myself on right now. And we're trying to teach our athletes because it's the same way that we look at life, right? I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 57. I'm hoping that I've got another 43 plus years on the planet. Okay. But only if I'm in good health and can enjoy things. Right. But and with that same token, I have to think about what should I be doing at 57 to give myself the best shot at the other 43 years.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's no different. And I think that's what I love about ultra running. It truly is like a metaphor for life. In any time you go over 10 miles out on the trails, it's a metaphor for life. It's
Mhm.
evaluating what are we doing here and what are we learning. And but I tell you, it's really powerful what we're hearing from our veteran athletes. It is changing their lives, even ones who have been training for a while, who are now part of our team and part of a tribe,
Mhm.
are talking about the value of the tribe. And, last weekend, the tribe came to my rescue, which was really cool.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm curious about that story. It sounds like there's something there. One thing that I want to reflect on here is how one of the ways in which ultra running can be a metaphor for life is that it forces you not to think about just the immediate. And
Yeah.
when I first joined Mission 22 about 5 years ago, it was like February of 2020, right? So the last chance, unbeknownst to me, before I'd be able to race again for a while. And we went to the Siuslaw Dunes 50K on the Oregon coast. And the description of the course basically said, like, oh, yeah, it's mostly single track with like 3 or 4 miles of sand dunes at the beginning and end. And so that was sort of like the unique thing about the race is that there's like these sand dunes. Turns out it was more like the opposite. It was like 3 miles of hard packed trail. The rest is sand. So I see what you did there, race director. But it was Magnus's first trail run of that distance, and he was asking me some tips and pointers and stuff. And what I told him is like, treat yourself now how you 1 hour from now would want to be treated. Right.
Yeah.
So what kind of food would you 1 hour from now want to be eating now? Or what
Yeah.
kind of pace or what kind of, drinking? And so, like, what does that sound an awfully lot like? Right?
Yeah.
Treat yourself
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
future self would want you to be treated.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
yeah, and so it's like what one thing that trauma and pain can do is reduce you down to the immediate. Like all you can think about is this pain that's in your life right in this second. And you
Mhm.
can understand why you would feel that way if that's where you're at. But then what is it that you need to break yourself out of that scenario? Well, maybe it is something as extreme as a challenge that you might not finish. And suddenly it's like, oh, I've got this bigger thing that I need to really expand my thinking of. And that to me is a huge part of undoing that trauma.
No, you're absolutely right. And that immediate thing is the toughest part because when you are reduced to that, what's right in front of you, which I experienced this weekend, um, it is very hard to see the rest. Um, and no matter what skills or tools or methodologies you might have had in the past to help you navigate through that, um, it's interesting to me how often it presents itself in a different way, just slightly off, that you look at it and say, well, that stuff's not going to work here, right? it's not it's not like we ever get like the same problem. I mean, think about every cold that you've had in life. Most of them, you can't say, "Oh, this is exactly the cold that I had where I needed amoxicillin or whatever to get through this," right? And like, y you can't like, you spend a few days trying to figure out what is this really gonna develop into? Is this
Mhm.
head, chest, whatever? It's the same thing with our mental health, right? What is this noise that I'm hearing right now going to turn into? And what's it gonna develop into? And thinking about our our combined missions, Mission 22, Warrior Trail Foundation, ultimately, I mean, I talk about it at a high level about how great trail running is for our veterans and how it helps them with their mental health and physical health and gives them positive reinforcement on living well and better lifestyle choices. But ultimately, this is about saving lives.
Mhm.
And that's where our missions collide and coincide. The reality of the situation is that, and I alluded to it, but the reason that I chose WTF, Warrior Trail Foundation, as our name, the WTF, was sort of an affront to the fact that, you know for 100 years we have had veterans coming back with PTSD, and we have not found a solution.
Mhm. Mhm.
We're making strides. Don't get me wrong. The VA is putting forth its best effort. But the problem is you have government trying to find a solution to a unique problem at the individual level. And it's almost impossible to do. You cannot take that. It needs to be grassroots. It needs to start in our village, in our tribe, and move up instead of being directed from the top down. And the biggest frustration to me is the billions of dollars that we have thrown at PTSD, um, you know, through the VA over the last 20 years, almost 30 years now, since 2001, right? And with no improvement in the suicide rate. As a matter of fact, 2024 numbers were worse than
Yeah.
2023.
Yeah, I saw that at a veteran or a VA DoD suicide prevention conference about a
Yeah.
year, a little over a year ago, and the numbers from like 2002 to 2023 had gone slightly up.
Yeah.
Like, and they were congratulating themselves because twice as many people were going to see the counselor. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
I-
exactly. And but the more telling number right now is this, and it's this interesting thing. Nobody paid attention to death certificates until COVID, right? When everybody suddenly got classified as a COVID death.
Mhm.
But here's the anti story, or the opposite story to that, is statistically and from the VA's own report on veteran suicide, another 20 to 30 veterans a day are dying from self-harm related to their PTSD
Mm.
or other issues. But they don't get classified as veteran suicides or PTSD suicides because they died as a result of drug overdose or something else. Alcoholism, reckless behavior, all these
Suicide by
things.
cop.
Yeah, exactly. These things do not get counted as suicides. So the real number is not 22. It's probably closer to 40, 45 a day of veterans that we're losing because we're not doing the right things. And I would argue we're not doing the right things at the community level, at the VA level, at the governmental level, at the state level. But here's what changes. If you get to that point where you're thinking about taking your life or thinking about making a poor choice, falling off the wagon, getting back into drugs or whatever else it may be. And I speak as an outsider to this because I've never been an addictive type person. Okay. I don't quite get that. I understand how it happens. I understand the science behind it, but I've never lived it. So I don't proclaim to know. But I do know this. If you have somebody in your corner that you can call on, your chances of getting through that are probably 100% better.
Mhm.
you know, at least 50%. And so we're more focused, in all honesty, on creating the tribe and creating the community at the grassroots here where we can call and depend on one another to help one another through these challenges. And I think that if that's the only thing we ever did, if all we ever did was create a scenario where you could go to a race and see 6 other people wearing this jersey and know that you're part of that team and have, been on a conference call with them beforehand and gotten to know them a little bit, gone on a trail run with them and know that you could count on them when the going got tough.
Mhm.
That's that's got a greater impact and greater opportunity to change the outlook in the future for that veteran than anything else that we can do for them. And I absolutely believe that. So,
Yeah, and it's such an important lesson too for everyone because the stats on numbers of close friends people have, like that, if there is one factor that you had to look at of someone's longevity, of someone's physical health, of everything, is like number of close connections. In fact, I've got like some stats on it. In 1990, the number of men, especially who said they had 6 or more friends, was 55%. In 2020, that number dropped to 21%. The number of men who say they have 0 close friends has increased 5 times over that period. 0.
wow. Yeah, I was talking to my therapist this morning. I said, I'll just say it. I think it's a very difficult time to be a male in the American society.
Yeah,
And,
and
and that's not an affront to females. I'm not saying it's not difficult for females either, but I think it's a difficult time for men specifically because we've been trained, many of us. I don't, know of your upbringing, but my upbringing was just be resilient and tough and don't show weakness, and you'll be okay. You can manage it. You want something to complain about, I'll give you something to complain about. That's what my dad used to say. Right?
bit advice to a 5-year-old.
Exactly. He was a very loving father, but I mean, that's the way he was raised and that's what he passed on to me. And then you find yourself when you're 57 struggling with some issues, and it's hard to make that initial move.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're talking about how much effort the VA and the government's putting into health and recovery. One of the things I think is a fundamental misunderstanding, especially for men, this is true for women too, but you can tell me what you think about this, is that we are designed to bear a load. And when that load is gone, so here's a really interesting story from World War II during the Blitz. In the UK, there were these hospitals basically for the mentally insane or however, whatever
Yeah.
descriptor they used. And they were these people were infirmed because of their mental, whatever it was. When the bombs started falling and their country needed them and they were called upon, almost all of the symptoms went away and they were able to take up arms and fight.
Yep.
So
Yeah, that story.
yeah, and so I think our healthcare system doesn't ask enough of the veteran patient, where it's like, "Hey, veteran patient, yeah, if you want to have a therapist to talk to, good. Like you need people to talk to,
Yeah.
but I need you to take responsibility, take up your cross, as it were, and follow and go. Like you need this." And so what I see in like one of the most important things that an organization like yours does, and this is very similar to how our programs run at Mission 22, is hey, we're calling on you to do hard things again. Like
Yeah.
your task is to carry something heavy and it's going to be difficult. But that's what you're designed to do. That's who you are.
Yeah. It's gonna hurt. Good,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Jocko Willink, I served with him in Iraq. And I love some of Jocko Willink's motivational things, but it's gonna hurt. Good. It's gonna be uncomfortable. Good. You're gonna be miserable. That's good. And because you don't learn anything from your comfortable lazy chair in the corner of your living room. I mean, and the reality of the situation is we need to be challenged. Our focus is trying to help them understand purpose. And I believe that to your point, the biggest solution to getting people, um, you know, combat veterans or just veterans with PTSD, they don't have to be combat veterans because many of them, as I mentioned, are military sexual trauma. or other trauma that they incurred while they were in the military, you know? But the reality is giving them purpose, getting them out there um, in community-based activities, having the community have like, you know, on Veterans Day, instead of having the parade and whatever else you may have, getting your veterans to come and speak at the library and tell their story, giving them purpose, getting them into the schools to talk to kids, you know, to develop programs, getting them engaged in coaching and doing other things. Like we're missing all of these skill sets. We've got all these amazing skill sets and we don't do anything with them. We
Mhm.
park them and say, well, don't worry. When you're like 75, there's this comfortable room over there at the VA hospital you can share with another veteran, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that when I was retiring from the Army, I worked for this awesome colonel. His name was Al Leppo, and he was a stud. That guy was in shape like you wouldn't believe. I mean, just ripped, you know? And he sat me down, and we were actually retired the same week together. But he sat me down and he said something to me that I've always remembered. He said, Chris, he said, you've got so much going for you. That's why I think you should retire.
Mm.
I think you should retire because you've got so much going for you. You need to go out and focus on other things. You've given 22 years of your life to the military, to your nation. Focus on some other things. And he said, but my last piece of advice to you is don't make your military service your greatest accomplishment in life.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, he said it should be part of you, not who you are.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful, right? And we should be like reinforcing that thought process on a daily basis. And I've joked on some other podcasts, but a little bit serious about it. The 10% discount at the local store and a thank you for your service. The rest of the world feels like they're really making a difference with that. But I can tell you, as a combat veteran, that doesn't do anything for me. Okay. Don't get me wrong. I don't mind the 10% discount, but if you gave me the alternative of feeling like I had a purpose and mission
Mhm.
or the 10% discount, I'd take the purpose and mission every single day. Right. And there's not a veteran out there who wouldn't do that because ultimately that's why we served. And I always laugh about the thank you for your service because it's not like any of us enlisted for Joe Schmo on the street. Right.
Yeah.
Nobody went into the military for that reason. Most of us went in for completely selfish reasons.
Hey, my college was paid for, you know?
Yeah, right. College was paid for. When I was in basic training, there were guys who were there as a ADR, like this was an alternative to going to jail. Okay. I don't know if they still do that, but back then, you know, half of my basic training unit in Fort Dix, New Jersey was guys who were like evading 6 to 18 months in the state pen. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the same people who are part of the thank you for your service culture are also the ones that are providing treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. You know, and when I was talking to my therapist today, I got a brand new therapist today. Um, but I was talking to her today and I was saying, well, she said, "Did you do any therapy with the VA?" I said, "Yeah, it was sort of a joke. I mean, I had brand new um therapists who had just, you know, graduated from school who were just trying to rack their hours up so they could get their license
Mhm.
and then go into private practice. None of them had any combat experience or even knew anything about the military. And I spent so much time in therapy rehashing what I had talked about 3 months before because I could only go once a quarter at that time. That's all the therapy. They didn't have room for all of us, you know? So I believe that it's gotten much better from that standpoint, but I still believe that the VA is probably one of the primary stopping points for recent grads.
Yeah, you're not the first person who I've heard say that. And so, one thing I want to ask about too is something that both of our programs have very much in common is that we're very coaching based. And
Mhm.
there's, you can talk to somebody about like, oh yeah, my coach told me to do this. And other military
Yeah,
guys, maybe even the most macho, it's like, oh yeah, coach. Yeah, okay, I know what that is. And
yeah,
it's so much more approachable and there's no accruing hours type stuff. There's no, I don't know. It's such a double-edged sword. Like the governing body, of course, you want to be able to keep out quackery, but then at the same time, you can also keep quackery in that you don't acknowledge it as such. So, but then coaching is a whole other. It's like this other arena where I don't know. You give the someone who's participating in it so much more permission to go different places, and so we have slightly different types of coaches, or although probably more in common than not. So tell me about the type of coaching experience that somebody going to the Warrior Trail Foundation would have.
So we're using elite ultra runners. Not I wouldn't say they're all elites, but the the premise is Jeff Browning is our head coach. He's If you know anything about trail running, you know the Jeff Browning name. He's probably like the one of the goats. I won't say he is the goat, but he's definitely one of the greatest of all time. Um, he's been an extremely resilient trail runner, winning 100-mile races as recently as this year at the age of 52, and he's been running for 30 years. You know, I mean,
There's still
that
time.
that
Yes.
there's still time. There's still hope, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. He's also a great friend of mine. And Jeff has helped us get this foundation off the ground with his team of coaches. We recently brought on Brittany Peterson, who is an elite runner in her own um, sake, and she is helping us with some of our other coaching experiences. And then we've got access to a sports psychologist that is helping out with some of our athletes. I am a Brown University trained and certified leadership and performance coach, basically fancy name for life coaching. But I have stepped in and done some coaching for a number of our athletes on that aspect. I'm also a certified ultra running coach, but I don't actually want to coach the running side of it. We've got elite athletes and very highly trained and experienced running coaches to handle that part of it. But we're trying to offer, basically the total package to help them in any capacity that they may need help. And as a wealth advisor, I've even been providing some wealth advice to and some small business startup advice to some of our athletes who are looking to do that. But one of the models that we learned in our other foundation, which was interesting, was we had a bunch of our warriors that came through our other program who eventually went on to become either ski patrollers or ski instructors. So one of the models we've actually seen already start to convey here because of our approach is we've got, I think three of our veteran athletes, warrior athletes right now, who are either going through their run coaching certification or have just recently completed it.
Hmm.
So their mindset, what they get with us when they come on board is 1 year of run coaching, and all the other things are just thrown in. But the 1 year of run coaching is the most definitive thing. And but it's really interesting that some of them have already like started moving forward, and at the end of their year they plan to continue to serve our organization by giving back to the future warriors. And that right there's that purpose we're serving, right, all within our organization. And again, it's the tribe mentality, it's the tribe approach. We're gonna take young our young braves, right? And train them to be warriors and warrior coaches and someday chiefs. Right. So
Yeah.
that's what we're looking at. And it's the approach that I think works and becomes self-fulfilling inside of our foundation.
Yeah. I love the stories of how, like, seeing the different ways in which warriors figure out what being a warrior now in society looks like. For one, it's kind of fraught with like, how on earth do I do this? The community doesn't understand me. I might be somebody who actually kind of enjoys violence in some way, especially if you're combat arms branch. I read in a book by Dr. J. um, oh, what's his last name? I'm gonna forget it. Anyway, the book is called Odysseus in America. Jonathan Shea. There we go. Jonathan
Oh,
Shea.
yeah.
And he basically draws these parallels between ancient Greek myths and the homecoming and going to war process of a soldier. And in one of those books, he's like, what if you were to take an infantryman and ask, like, taking all of his skills, and then let's apply that to the civilian world, what jobs would he be good at? You want to guess what it was?
No.
A life of crime. You know, like breaking and entering. Where does that come
Yeah.
from? Pillaging.
Yeah.
Kicking
Well,
catches,
I
moving
know.
stuff up.
I know. I mean, this is one of the things that people don't understand. I will tell you, a surprising number of our veterans, their trauma originates from their separation of service.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I like to use this story because I think it's a perfect one. I've got a female that's actually, she's like one of our volunteers and helps out with our board. We call her part of the tribe, but she's not actually in formal coaching with any of our coaches, and we're not paying for it. Um, but she's still active, very active with our organization and a huge supporter of our foundation. But she was in the Navy, and her last job in the Navy was hanging bombs on on the bottom of F-18s, right? So, I mean, tell me what job that correlates to in the civilian sector,
Yeah.
right? So, in the Navy, every single person in the Navy learns to be a firefighter because on the most dangerous thing that can happen on a ship is a fire, right? So, um, she comes out and she decides she wants to be a wildland firefighter. Well, then she discovers that her experience firefighting or certifications firefighting in the Navy don't mean anything to the National Forest and or I don't even what is it, Department of Agriculture, I think actually handles wildland firefighters. So um doesn't carry any weight there. She has to go through all kinds of schooling, like 2 years of school before she can even apply for her firefighter training, and then like another 2 years of training to get her card. And I'm like, sort of ridiculous. Like there should be a fast track for somebody coming out of the military who actually was a certified firefighter in the military, right? But there's not, and it's at least to my knowledge, and I might be misspeaking on exactly all the details of that, but I'm just giving that as an example. That causes a lot of anxiety for somebody who's given 24 years of their career, of their life, to the United States Navy. And she went into the Navy at the age of 18 to basically get away from the environment that she was in, right? And she found a home, and that became the only home that she knew. And then she's promoted and rewarded and trained and educated and all those things for 24 years. And then, congratulations. Here's the real world.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a moment in life, not quite to that same, contrast,
Mm.
but between my active duty time and then getting back into the reserves and then figuring out, before I was with Mission 22, there was a summer where I got fired unexpectedly from the software job. And
Uh-huh.
it was right at the time when I was buying a house. So I was like, well, that kind of sucks. I need to find a job immediately. So went to this sort of touristy area and waited tables, which it paid okay. But I had a moment where I was literally scraping gum off the bottom of a table with a knife with an engineer degree in my pocket and having been an officer in the army. Like, what happened here? Um,
Yeah, exactly.
but one thing I want to encourage listeners with, if you're feeling like, well, I'm I only really have this one dimension to me when it comes to my vocation. Well, I mean, it reminds me, there's this great quote that goes like this: a human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects,
Yeah.
right?
No, I don't disagree. I think it's fantastic. That's a great quote. And but I think what's interesting is not it's actually been through this foundation in the last 14 months that I've learned of the separation anxiety being as significant as it is, you know? Um, I spent the majority of my career in the National Guard, so we all had other lives, right? And one of my biggest challenges was when I would get an active duty officer come in under my command who was rotating off of, his 3 years or 4 years of active duty into his last 2 years of reserve duty. And how was I going to manage this person? Because they came in with a total different mindset, right? They had lived in their uniform every single day, and most of us had only put our uniform on, 60 days a year. Right?
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time coaching those young officers and how to, you know, integrate into a different society than one that they were used to. But and then most of them did not stay, right? Most of them, after they did their reserve duty, called it a day. Um, I wouldn't say that that program was a great way of keeping officers for the long haul. Um, so that was just our experience in the Pennsylvania National Guard. But um, I do think that there's just so much that we're learning on a regular basis. I learn every day through my work with this foundation. Um, and it's really been so powerful for me to see, how everything comes full circle. I alluded to it a little bit in the beginning, but this last weekend I went to run Tahoe 200. My mind was not in the right place when I started the race, and I shouldn't have even started. And at the end of the first day, I had just made a um, complete massive error, and decided to pull the plug on the race because my mind just wasn't where it needed to be. I talked to my coach, and we had a discussion about it and agreed that it didn't make sense to just continue to beat myself silly in this race with other races coming up this summer. So pull the plug and get back to focus on recovery
Mm.
and reset, you know? And she reached out to me about 10 minutes later and said, you're not going to believe this, but one of our warrior athletes is actually in Lake Tahoe right now. And I told her about what was going on with you, and she wants to come and pick you up. So, and 5 minutes later, I got a phone call from that warrior athlete who called me up, Amber, and said, "Hey, where are you right now?" I said, "Oh, I'm about 6 miles from Route 89." She said, "I'm on Route 89."
Mhm.
And she said, "I will pick you up whenever you cross 89."
Wow.
I said, "It could be a while." you know? She said, "I got nowhere to be but here to be with you." And what an amazing moment. Like it was certainly not programmed. I had no idea Amber was going to be in Lake Tahoe, and she was there just on a whim in advance of Broken Arrow. She's going out there to run Broken Arrow, and she decided to go a little early. And the stars aligned. And I don't know how to explain it except for the fact that I don't believe that that's accidental. I believe this was like a reinforcement moment for our foundation. And it was awesome for her. It was awesome for my coach. It was awesome for me, for this whole thing to come full circle. And I actually decided that that's probably going to be like the opening scene of the book that I've been working on.
Oh, nice.
You know?
Yeah, I think you're answering my next question of like what's next.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been working on this book for a while. Because I don't think my story is exceptional, and I think that's why it needs to be written, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
Um, I think my story is probably, you know, tens of thousands of veterans, combat veterans since 2000 could probably look at my story and say, yeah, it's very similar, you know? But the truth of the matter is still to this day, less 1% of our population in this country serves in the military. And if you add in all the veterans dating back to World War II, it makes up less than 4%. And if you look at the demographics of that age group, such a large percentage of that, of 4% is Vietnam era, who are we're losing every day now. We're very soon going to be in a situation where it's like less than 1.5 or less than 2% for sure of our population in the United States has ever served. And no wonder we can't get anybody to pay attention or to, put the uh, focus where it needs to be. If the issue only applies to 2% or less of the population, it's so much easier to focus on everything else, right?
Right.
And I think that I have a dream. Maybe you can help me with this dream. Um, I love the environment as much as the next guy, and I think 1% for the planet is fantastic. But what about 1% for 1%?
Yeah.
How about corporations giving 1% of their profits or proceeds to the 1% that are serving to give them the right and the freedom to operate their business in our great nation? That to me makes a hell of a lot more sense and probably will have a lot greater impact on what's going on with our veterans than what we're getting out of the other deals.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, we are by the time this releases, we'll have announced the Mission 22 WAD. Basically, it's sort of like for listeners who've probably heard of Murph or Chad that across the
Yeah,
do. And so we're releasing kind of the same idea, but specifically for the 22 number. And we've gotten a bit of corporate backing for that so far. So who knows?
awesome.
Maybe there's some opportunity to continue that conversation in that way.
Yeah, fantastic. I look forward to learning about it and being a part of it.
Awesome. Well, where can listeners go to find out more about Warrior Trail Foundation and what you do?
Warriortrail.org. Doesn't get any easier than that. We just rolled out a new website about a month ago. It's fantastic. We're really proud of it. Um, and if they wanted to see like an example of some of the things that we've done, like we helped and supported and worked with Jeff Browning on his Colorado Trail FKT effort last year, which he did set the fastest known time from Durango to Denver. And that video, that documentary that we funded from the foundation to tell our story about what we're doing, and Jeff as um, the key role player in showing what resilience looks like at a more mature age. Um, yeah, so that's called Skin in the Game. And if you look up Jeff Browning's Skin in the Game on YouTube, you'll find that we just released it on Friday. So it's about an hour long. It's a fantastic documentary that shows what ultra running at its highest level looks like. He crossed the 480, almost 500 miles, and almost 100,000 vertical feet of climbing across the Colorado Trail in just over 7 days. So
Dang, that's
pretty
awesome.
amazing.
Yeah, we'll make sure to have a link of that in the description.
Yeah. And obviously, we would love to have um, financial donations and people step up to be volunteers and whatever else. And of course, if you're making a donation to our foundation, make one to Mission 22 at the same time.
Rock and roll. I hear that. Well, appreciate you so much. Really, thank you for your time today.
Yeah. Thank you.